when the flight attendant made the fateful decision to judge who was worthy of private jet access, she crossed a line that would cost her dearly. Her words, sharp and filled with venom, frowned everyone in their tracks. It was a moment that would ultimately lead to her downfall. Kimberly Johnson, a 36-year-old powerful black entrepreneur, had just come out of one of the most challenging years of her life. After months of relentless negotiations and sleepless nights, she finally secured the deal to acquire Skylex Air, a boutique airline known for its luxury and exclusivity. This wasn't just a professional victory, it was personal. Every step toward her success had been met with obstacles, doubt, and a number of skeptical glances, but today was supposed to be her moment of triumph. Kimberly had arrived early at the private airport, as she always did. Her reputation for punctuality and focus was well known. Stepping out of her black town car, she was dressed in a sleek business suit, paired with oversized sunglasses that spoke volumes about her confidence. The morning sun reflected off her polished exterior as she made her way toward the check-in desk. Inside, the air was filled with the sound of quiet efficiency. Polished floors and subtle tones permeated the space, with the familiar scent of leather, wood polish, and freshly brewed coffee. However, as Kimberly reached the boarding area, her greeting was far from the warm reception she expected. Cindy Meyer, a 29-year-old flight attendant with icy blue eyes and a tight-lipped smile, was the first to approach her. Without a hint of recognition, Cindy gave Kimberly a quick once-over, making it clear that she had already formed an opinion about who Kimberly was, or rather, who she wasn't. "Excuse me," Cindy began, her voice laced with polite condescension. "I think you're in the wrong area. This is for private flights only." Kimberly raised an eyebrow, her gaze steady as she replied, "I know this is my flight." Cindy blinked, her practiced smile faltering for a brief moment, before quickly snapping back into place. "Your flight," she echoed in disbelief, as if Kimberly's presence was impossible to reconcile. Her eyes scanned Kimberly from head to toe, taking in the perfect suit and designer shoes. "I'm sorry, but people like you don't usually fly private." The words landed in the air like an insult, but Kimberly didn't flinch. She'd heard it all before, and although it stung, she remained composed. Taking a deep breath, she steeled herself against the venomous tone, silently reminding herself that today would not be the day she allowed someone like Cindy to provoke her. But Cindy wasn't finished. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a mock whisper. "Maybe you're with the service crew." She chuckled, as if this suggestion were a secret only she could understand. "Housekeeping, this area's for clients only." Kimberly's lips twitched, her annoyance barely concealed beneath her calm exterior. She adjusted her sunglasses with deliberate grace before responding. "I've already checked in. If you'll excuse me, I'd like to board my flight." Cindy's nostrils flared, but she stepped aside begrudgingly. Though her disdain was impossible to miss, Kimberly didn't need words to understand the meaning behind every icy stare and patronizing comment. It was clear that Cindy believed Kimberly didn't belong there. As Kimberly boarded the jet, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She'd faced these types of challenges before. This was no new battle, but for some reason, today felt different, like the storm was brewing on the horizon. The interior of the private jet was breathtaking. Every detail was meticulously designed to exude luxury. Leather seats with flawless stitching, polished wooden accents that glistened under the soft cabin lighting, and fresh bouquets of lilies on every table, adding a touch of refinement to the atmosphere. The cabin radiated exclusivity, a space reserved for only the most distinguished clientele. Yet, for Cindy Meyer, the 29-year-old flight attendant with a superiority complex, all of this seemed irrelevant. To her, the luxury of the jet was just a backdrop for the lesson she was about to deliver. As she strutted down the aisle, her confidence was palpable, the kind of attitude you'd expect from someone who thought she was untouchable. She walked with purpose, her eyes narrowing as she approached Kimberly, who was seated and calmly reviewing documents on her tablet. Cindy's lips curled into a condescending smile as she leaned in closer, her tone dripping with syrupy sweetness, but the venom beneath was unmistakable. "I bet this is your first time being surrounded by this level of luxury," she whispered, making sure her voice carried across the cabin. "Soak it in while you can, honey, because let's be real, this isn't for people like you." Kimberly's finger hovered over the tablet screen as she paused. She didn't rush to respond. Slowly, she turned her head to meet Cindy's gaze, her expression calmly calm. It was the kind of stillness that precedes a storm, an icy composure that only served to intensify the tension. "Excuse me," Kimberly said, her voice steady, but I think you're stepping far beyond the boundaries of your role." The words were measured, but sharp enough to pierce the silence that had enveloped the cabin. For a split second, Cindy blinked, taken aback by Kimberly's cool demeanor. It was clear she hadn't expected the calm response, but instead of retreating, Cindy doubled down, her posture straightening as she allowed her voice to carry further. "Oh, sweetie," Cindy sneered, her tone growing louder, "you really don't know who you're talking to, do you? Let me spell it out for you. You don't belong here." The disdain was thick in her voice, the words deliberately aimed to provoke. Kimberly's grip tightened slightly around her tablet, but she remained silent. Her lack of response only seemed to infuriate Cindy more, and it wasn't long before Cindy continued her tirade. "You're just some," she hesitated, glancing around as if savoring the dramatic pause, before finishing with a flourish. "You're just some charity case who wandered into a place you don't belong, and honestly, I don't have to stand here and pretend otherwise." Before Kimberly could even process the weight of Cindy's words, the flight attendant took it even further. With a swift and deliberate motion, Cindy leaned in and spat directly in Kimberly's face. The cabin fell into stunned silence. A couple of nearby crew members, who had been preparing refreshments, frowned at step. Their eyes darted between Cindy and Kimberly. Yet no one said a word. The atmosphere was suffocating, the kind of pressure that made it feel impossible to breathe. Kimberly's jaw tightened as she closed her eyes for a brief moment. She was fighting the urge to react, to let her anger show, but she wasn't going to let Cindy see her break. Instead, with deliberate grace, Kimberly pulled a silk handkerchief from her pocket. She wiped the spit from her face, moving slowly, carefully. It was an action that, more than any outburst, radiated control. Every movement was measured, precise, and intimidation in its quiet grace. As she stood up, she straightened her blazer and looked Cindy directly in the eye. Her voice was calm but laced with a quiet fury. "You," Kimberly said, each word hanging in the air with weight, "have just made the biggest mistake of your life." Before Cindy could react, the cockpit door swung open. Captain Thomas Reeves, a seasoned pilot in his early 40s, with neatly combed silver streaks in his hair, stepped into the cabin. His expression shifted from confusion to irritation as his eyes scanned the scene. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice firm, demanding an explanation. Cindy opened her mouth, clearly preparing to spin a version of events that would absolve her. But the moment she saw Captain Reeves's eyes land on Kimberly, something changed. Recognition dawned on him, and the color drained from his face. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice softening. I didn't realize you were already on board." His words carried a mix of surprise and shock. Cindy's smug confidence evaporated in an instant as her eyes darted between the captain and Kimberly. She had just insulted someone far more important than she had ever imagined. Kimberly didn't need to say a word. Her silence spoke volumes. The power dynamic in the room had shifted completely. Captain Reeves, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, turned to Kimberly, his tone now respectful. "Miss Johnson, I deeply apologize for this incident. We had no idea you were already on board." Kimberly's gaze remained steady, unwavering as she faced Cindy, who was now pale and speechless. The truth had set in. The woman she had so confidently insulted was the billionaire owner of Skylex Air, the very company Cindy worked for. With one final glance at Cindy, Kimberly spoke again, her voice even but firm. "I have one simple rule," she said, her words carrying the weight of authority. "A client is a client, no matter the color of their skin. But what I won't tolerate is this kind of behavior from my employees." Cindy stood there, frowning, her bravado completely gone. "This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered, but Kimberly didn't let her finish. "You knew exactly what you were doing," Kimberly cut in sharply, "and now you're going to learn how much it matters." The weight of Kimberly's words hung in the air, heavy and final. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. Only sound was the subtle hum of the plane's engines. Cindy, standing in the middle of the cabin, was a picture of panic. Her face had drained of color, her bravado completely evaporated. She had expected to get away with her insults, to continue her petty bullying, but now she was realizing that her actions had consequences far beyond anything she could have imagined. The other flight attendants, who had been silent spectators up until this point, began to shift uncomfortably, one by one. They started to speak up, offering their apologies to Kimberly, expressing their support, and acknowledging the gravity of what had just transpired. It was clear that none of them wanted to be associated with Cindy's behavior any longer. Her reputation had already taken a hit, and they were eager to distance themselves from the situation. Kimberly didn't respond to their apology. She didn't need to. Her silence was enough to let everyone know that the damage had been done. There was no room for second chances here. Cindy had crossed a line, and now there would be consequences. Captain Reeves, regaining his composure, straightened up and turned to face Kimberly. The shift in his tone was immediate. He no longer seemed the casual observer, but a man who fully understood the situation. His voice was now filled with utmost professionalism, the respect he held for Kimberly undeniable. "Miss Johnson," Captain Reeves began, "I will personally report this incident to corporate and ensure that appropriate actions are taken. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable, and it does not represent Skylick's Air in any way." Kimberly gave him a curt nod, acknowledging his words without adding anything further. She didn't need to. It was clear that the captain understood the gravity of the situation. She had already made her point, and it was evident that her words would be acted upon swiftly. Her gaze moved back to Cindy, whose expression was one of complete defeat. Kimberly had seen this reaction before, realization that the consequences of one's actions had finally caught up with them. Cindy's face was crumpled, the smugness that had once defined her now gone, replaced by a palpable fear. "You're done here," Kimberly said, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the silence like a knife. The words were final, unyielding. There was no room for debate. Cindy's mouth opened and closed in protest, but there was nothing she could say without another word. She turned, her once confident stride reduced to a defeated shuffle. The arrogance she had displayed moments before was completely gone, replaced by the harsh reality of her actions. As Cindy left the cabin, the atmosphere shifted once again. The tension that had hung in the air like a storm cloud began to dissipate, replaced by an odd sense of calm. The crew members, who had been frowning in place, began to move again, their movements more deliberate, more respectful. They went about their duties with a newfound attentiveness, their demeanor shifting to match the tone of Kimberly's leadership. Kimberly took a deep breath, letting the calmness wash over her. She returned to her seat, her movements deliberate as she pulled out her silk handkerchief once more to wipe the last trace of Cindy's spit from her cheek. The action was methodical, each movement sharp with purpose. As she finished, she glanced around the cabin. The crew, no longer hesitant, were all suddenly very aware of who they were working for. Kimberly could feel the shift in the room. Respect was palpable. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the engines roaring to life. As the jet began its ascent, Kimberly leaned back into the plush leather seat, a small smile playing at the corner of her lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was something deeper, a quiet satisfaction that spoke to something far more important than just this moment. Kimberly had made her point, but more than that, she had set a precedent. This wasn't just about her standing up for herself. This was a message to her company, to her team, and to anyone else who thought they could dismiss people based on their prejudices. The world was changing, and she wasn't about to let anyone stand in the way of that change. Looking out the window as the plane ascended, Kimberly allowed herself a moment of reflection. This moment wasn't just a victory. It was a lesson in respect, in equality, and in the kind of leadership that didn't back down in the face of injustice. This was more than just a personal triumph. It was a message delivered at 30,000 feet. Kimberly knew the ripple effect would be felt long after the plane had touched down in Los Angeles. Her leadership would be remembered. Her actions would speak louder than words ever could. As the jet soared through the skies, Kimberly allowed herself a moment of peace. The familiar hum of the engines, a soothing backdrop to her thoughts. She had endured so much to get to this point, and yet, this moment felt like a pivot. It wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about making a statement tone that would resonate far beyond the walls of Skylick's Air and change the culture within her company forever. The flight attendants, once so silent, now moved with purpose. Their interactions with Kimberly were careful, respectful, as if they understood they were witnessing something far bigger than just a woman on a private jet. They were witnessing the kind of leadership that could not be ignored, a leadership that demanded accountability and equality, regardless of status or position. Kimberly's mind wandered briefly to the events of the morning, the insidious condescension from Cindy, the venom in her voice, the assumption that someone like Kimberly didn't belong. She had expected a lot of things today: luxury, comfort, a chance to breathe after the whirlwind of the past year, but she hadn't expected the ugliness that had been thrown her way. But she had dealt with it before, and today, she was dealing with it again, only this time on her terms. The satisfaction she felt wasn't the kind that came from watching someone fall from grace. It was the kind that came from standing up for what was right, for ensuring that no one, no matter their title or position, could ever feel small or diminished in her presence. The shift in atmosphere aboard the plane was subtle but undeniable. The crew, previously hesitant, now seemed to understand that they were working for a company with new values that could not tolerate prejudice or discrimination. Kimberly was setting a tone for her airline that would ripple through every employee, from the ground staff to the pilots, from the executives to the cleaners. There would be no more room for discrimination, no more room for biases that had no place in a world striving for equality. In the midst of her reflections, the door to the cockpit opened again. Captain Reeves stepped into the cabin, his face a mixture of concern and professionalism. He had been quiet during the exchange, but now his demeanor was one of clear respect. He knew that his role was to support Kimberly, to ensure that she felt safe and valued aboard her own aircraft. His attitude had shifted to no longer the neutral observer, but a man who had witnessed an injustice and understood the need to rectify it. "Miss Johnson," he began, his tone respectful, "I just wanted to check in and make sure you're okay after everything that happened back there." Kimberly looked up from her tablet, her expression calm but focused. "I'm fine, Captain, but thank you for checking in. What matters now is what happens next. We both know this can't just be an isolated incident. This needs to be addressed at the highest level." Captain Reeves nodded, his posture rigid with the weight of the conversation. "You're right. I'll be making sure this incident is reported directly to corporate. The kind of behavior that occurred today is unacceptable, and it will not stand." Kimberly's gaze softened slightly. She appreciated the captain's professionalism, but she also knew that the real work was about to begin. The incident had been a wake-up call, not just for the crew members who had witnessed it, but for the entire company. Skylex Air was about to face a reckoning. "There's one more thing," Kimberly said, her voice steady but determined. "I want to make it clear to everyone that this is not just about one flight attendant. This is about the culture we foster within Skylex. We need to be a company that values every client, no matter who they are, where they come from, or what they look like. We need to be a company that stands for equality. That starts with you, Captain. It starts with the leadership team, and it starts with me." Captain Reeves met her gaze, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then, with a slow nod, he spoke. "Understood. We'll make sure the right steps are taken." Kimberly appreciated his words, but she wasn't about to take anything for granted. She knew that real change came from actions, not just promises. This was just the beginning. As the plane continued its smooth ascent, Kimberly's thoughts shifted again, this time to the long road ahead. There would be meetings, discussions, and undoubtedly some resistance. There always was when it came to changing the status quo. But Kimberly was no stranger to challenges. She had built her career on overcoming obstacles, on breaking down barriers, and on proving that she belonged at the table. This would be no different. The rest of the flight passed in relative silence, the crew going about their work with newfound respect. Kimberly allowed herself to relax, the weight of the situation starting to lift. The storm had passed, but she knew that the ripple effect would continue long after they touched down in Los Angeles. This wasn't just a victory for Kimberly, it was a victory for anyone who had ever been judged unfairly, who had ever been made to feel less than, and she knew that as she moved forward, her example would inspire others to stand up, to speak out, and to demand the respect they deserved. When the plane finally touched down in Los Angeles, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the sprawling city below in a golden glow. Kimberly watched from her seat, lost in thought. The events of the day hadn't just been an unfortunate encounter with a single flight attendant. They had become a defining moment, not only for her personally but for the entire company she was building. Skylex Air had always prided itself on exclusivity, on catering to an elite clientele who expected nothing less than perfection. But perfection didn't mean perfection in treatment, in respect, in human decency. Perfection meant creating an environment where everyone felt valued, no matter their background. That was Kimberly's vision, and she was willing to fight for it. As the plane taxied to the gate, Kimberly's phone buzzed with a message from her corporate assistant, Valerie. It was a quick note confirming that the board of directors was expecting her the following morning to discuss the latest acquisition and her vision for Skylex's future. Kimberly hadn't shared much with the board yet. The last year had been a whirlwind of deals, decisions, and negotiations, leaving little room for introspection or long-term strategy. But now, she had a moment to breathe, to reflect on her goals, and most importantly, to determine how the events of the day would shape the company moving forward. As she gathered her things and prepared to disembark, Captain Reeves approached her once again, His face was more serious than before, the earlier respect now replaced by a certain nervous energy. Kimberly could sense the tension in his demeanor. He knew what was at stake. "Miss Johnson," Captain Reeves began, his voice a bit softer than usual, "I want to personally apologize again for what happened today. This is not the kind of behavior we tolerate at Skylex. I've already spoken to the rest of the crew, and we'll make sure this incident is addressed." Kimberly nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I appreciate your professionalism, Captain, but this is bigger than just a conversation with the crew. This goes straight to the heart of Skylex culture. We need to make sure that this kind of behavior isn't just discouraged. It needs to be eradicated." Reeves agreed, his tone unwavering. "Understood, Miss Johnson. I'll take it up with HR first thing tomorrow. You have my word." Kimberly didn't respond immediately. Her mind was already racing ahead, formulating a plan. She wasn't interested in just talking about change. She wanted action, real action that would set a precedent for how every employee, from top to bottom, treated their clients and colleagues. As she stepped off the plane and made her way through the private terminal, Kimberly noticed a few familiar faces, longtime associates, members of the press, and some of the top executives from Skylex. They were all there to welcome her, to congratulate her on the deal, and to discuss what came next for the company. But as Kimberly passed by, her mind remained focused on the issue at hand. The world outside was ready to celebrate her success, but inside, the storm was still brewing. She couldn't ignore the whispers, the subtle but unmistakable glances of curiosity and judgment that followed her wherever she went. She knew what they were thinking, how she was going to handle this. How would Kimberly Johnson, a black woman in a world dominated by a certain elite, respond to the injustice that had just been thrust upon her? She would rise above it. She always did. As she entered the lobby of the airport, she was greeted by Valerie, who was standing by with a warm smile. But even Valerie's usual cheery disposition couldn't mask the concern in her eyes. Kimberly had been keeping a low profile, letting her work speak for itself. But the incident on the plane had changed that. It had put her at the center of a storm that she could not ignore. "Kimberly," Valerie said quietly as they walked together toward the waiting car, "I've been getting calls all day. Aboard, media outlets, even a few clients have reached out about what happened." Kimberly nodded, knowing exactly what Valerie meant. The incident was already making headlines. The story of the flight attendant and her condescending remarks spreading across the internet like wildfire. The press would seize upon this as another example of the discrimination and bias that still plagued the world of luxury air travel. "I'm aware," Kimberly replied, her voice steady, "but this isn't just about me or what happened today. This is about changing the culture within Skylex Air. I'm not going to let this moment define us in the eyes of the world. Instead, we're going to use it to set a new standard." Valerie's brow furrowed slightly. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Kimberly stopped walking for a moment, turning to face her assistant. "I'm going to make sure that Skylex is known for being more than just a luxury airline. We're going to be a company that stands for equality, respect, and fairness. That means no more tolerating discrimination from anyone. Not the staff, not the clients. If anyone has a problem with that, they'll need to find another job or another airline." Valerie's eyes widened slightly. "You're serious about this, aren't you?" "Dead serious," Kimberly said, her tone unwavering. "I've spent my whole life proving that I belong in spaces that people like Cindy Meyer think I don't deserve to be in. And if we're going to lead this company into the future, we need to make sure that no one else has to fight those battles. No one else should have to prove their worth to anyone." As they arrived at the car, Kimberly felt the weight of her words settle in. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be without its obstacles. But Kimberly had learned long ago that the only way to create lasting change was to push forward with unwavering determination. The car doors closed, and the world outside the window blurred into the distance. Kimberly took a deep breath, looking out over the city as the skyline of Los Angeles unfolded before her. This was just the beginning, and the real work, the hard work, was about to begin. The next morning, Kimberly found herself sitting in a sleek conference room at Skylex Air's headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. The sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow on the polished marble floors. The meeting table was made of rich, dark wood, and every chair surrounding it was occupied by someone whose opinion mattered. Members of the board, top executives, and a few senior managers. The atmosphere was professional but tense, Kimberly could feel the weight of the conversation she was about to have pressing down on her, but she was ready. The events of the previous day had already set the wheels of change into motion. She had made her stance clear with the staff, the captain, and even the press. But this meeting was about more than just correcting one flight attendant's behavior. This meeting was about reshaping the culture of Skylex Air, ensuring that the company was built on the foundation of respect, equality, and inclusivity. As the last of the board members settled into their seats, Kimberly stood at the head of the table, her posture straight and confident. She wasn't here to ask for permission or approval. She was here to set a direction, and she knew that she needed to lead with unwavering resolve. I trust everyone is aware of the situation that occurred yesterday, Kimberly began, her voice calm but firm. There was no need for preamble, no time for pleasantries. Everyone in the room had seen the headlines. The flight attendants' words and actions were all over the news, and the incident had become a flashpoint for larger conversations about discrimination and bias in the workplace. A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the room, and Kimberly continued, "What happened on that plane was unacceptable, and not just because it happened to me was unacceptable, because it goes against everything that Skylex Air should stand for. We are a company that prides itself on luxury and exclusivity, but we cannot claim to be leaders in the industry if we fail to create an environment where every client and every employee is treated with respect." She let her words sink in. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on her. She knew they were all waiting for her next move, but Kimberly wasn't concerned with their judgment. She was focused on the task ahead. "I am not here to discuss the specifics of what happened yesterday," she continued. "That has already been addressed. What I'm here to discuss is how we move forward. How do we ensure that this never happens again? How do we make sure that the culture at Skylex Air reflects the values of respect, equality, and inclusion? This is not just about one incident. It's about transforming our company into a place where everyone feels they belong. And that starts with us." One of the senior managers, a man in his late 50s named Jonathan Parks, spoke up. "Kimberly, we're all aware of this situation, but we need to think about the long-term implications of this. We can't just react to one employee's mistake. We need to be strategic about how we implement these changes." Kimberly nodded, fully expecting this kind of pushback. Jonathan was a seasoned veteran in the world of corporate leadership, and he was focused on the bottom line, on risk management. He wasn't wrong to think about the long-term impact, but Kimberly knew that this was one of those moments where doing the right thing outweighed any short-term discomfort. "I agree, Jonathan. We need a plan," Kimberly said, her voice steady. "But it has to be a plan that is bold, that is uncompromising. We will institute mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI training for every employee, from the pilots to the flight attendants, to the top executives. We will make it clear that discrimination in any form will not be tolerated, and we will hold people accountable. This will be non-negotiable." She paused for a moment, allowing the gravity of her words to settle over the room. There was a palpable shift in the atmosphere, an uneasy quiet that made it clear this wasn't a conversation about policies and procedures. This was a conversation about values, about the future of the company, and about who they were going to be as a brand. Kimberly's voice grew even more resolute. "I also want to establish a zero-tolerance policy for any form of bias or discrimination, whether it's based on race, gender, socioeconomic status, or anything else. If any employee is found violating this policy, they will be terminated, no exceptions." Another board member, Rachel Pierce, a woman in her 40s who had been with Skylex for over 15 years, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Kimberly, that's a very strong stance. But what about clients? We cater to some of the wealthiest people in the world. If a client makes a complaint about an employee, how do we handle that? We can't afford to lose our top clients over a policy like this." Kimberly's gaze sharpened, and she leaned forward slightly, her tone unwavering. "If a client behaves in a way that goes against our values, then they are not the kind of client we want. Skylex Air is a luxury brand. Yes, but luxury isn't just about the price tag. It's about treating people with dignity and respect. If someone cannot respect our employees, they will no longer be welcome on our planes. And if we lose business over that, so be it. I'm not building a company where discrimination is tolerated, not even for the sake of profit." The room was quiet, and for a moment, Kimberly thought she could hear the gears of the corporate machine grinding to a halt. She was pushing them to rethink everything. She was challenging their preconceived notions about what it meant to run a successful luxury airline. But she wasn't finished. We're also going to make sure that this kind of change is reflected in every aspect of our branding and marketing. Skylex Air will be a company known for its commitment to diversity and inclusion. Our clients, our staff, and the public will know that we stand for something bigger than just luxury. We will be leaders in this space, and we will take bold steps to show that we mean it. There was a long silence as the board members exchanged glances. Finally, Jonathan Park spoke again, this time with a tone that was more measured but still carrying a hint of doubt. You realize that making such sweeping changes will take time. Kimberly, we're talking about overhauling our culture and rebranding an entire company. Kimberly smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that exuded confidence. I understand, Jonathan, but this isn't just about time. It's about getting it right. And trust me, we're ready. I'm ready. As she finished speaking, the board members fell into an intense discussion. Kimberly's mind was already miles ahead, envisioning the path that lay before her. The hard work was just beginning, but she was undeterred. She had already faced the storm. Now, she was going to reshape the skies. The weeks that followed were filled with a whirlwind of activity. Kimberly's vision for Skylex Air was no longer just a concept. It was becoming a reality. She worked tirelessly with her leadership team to implement the changes she had outlined in her meeting with the board. Diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI training sessions were scheduled for every department, from ground crew to flight attendants, and even the top-tier executives. Kimberly knew it wasn't going to be an easy road, but she was committed to seeing it through. The first few sessions were tense. Many employees had never been confronted with their own biases, and the discomfort in the room was palpable. But Kimberly wasn't about to let that deter her. She knew the importance of this moment, not just for the company, but for every individual who walked through the doors of Skylex Air. Slowly but surely, the sessions began to spark conversations, with people questioning their long-held assumptions and beliefs. And while the journey was far from complete, Kimberly could sense that the seeds of change had been planted. But it wasn't just the internal changes that were gaining momentum. Skylex Air's rebranding campaign, focused on diversity and inclusion, was launched with a series of bold advertisements and messages that would shake the luxury travel industry to its core. Kimberly's face appeared on billboards, not just as the CEO of a private airline, but as a symbol of change. The campaign was unapologetic. Skylex was no longer just about wealth and exclusivity. It was about the people who flew with them, the employees who worked for them, and the commitment to making sure everyone felt welcome. It didn't take long for the reactions to start rolling in. Some clients were thrilled by the message, praising the company for taking a stand on social issues. Others, however, were less than pleased. There were complaints. There were clients who vowed to never fly with Skylex again. Some were outright vocal in their disdain. But Kimberly wasn't deterred. She knew that standing firm in her beliefs would cost her some business, but it would also create a loyal customer base who shared her vision for the future. The ones who mattered would remain. One morning, a few months after the rebranding had been rolled out, Kimberly sat in her office, overlooking the Los Angeles skyline. Her inbox was full of messages, some of them congratulatory, others critical, and a few downright hostile. She had expected the backlash, but even still, the weight of it all was starting to take its toll. She had spent countless hours responding to emails, meeting with employees, and refining the company's approach to ensure the changes were sustainable. It was exhausting, but it was necessary. Then, a message caught her eye. It wasn't a complaint or a congratulatory note. It was a letter from an employee of the flight attendants. No less. Her name was Olivia West, a young woman who had been working for Skylex for less than a year. Kimberly hadn't known her well, but she had heard good things about her performance. The subject line read, "Thank you." With a deep breath, Kimberly opened the email. "Dear Miss Johnson, it feels strange to write this, but I wanted to personally thank you for the changes you've been making at Skylex Air. As someone who has worked in the airline industry for a few years, I can honestly say that I've never worked for a company where I felt truly valued. Before your leadership, I often found myself questioning if I belonged here. I was always aware of the subtle discrimination, the uncomfortable looks, the whispered judgments. But now, I see a real shift. It may not be perfect yet, but I can feel the change. I feel respected. I feel seen. I feel like Skylex is becoming a place where I can grow and be proud to work. I just wanted you to know that what you're doing matters. Thank you. Olivia West." Kimberly read the email twice, her chest tightening with emotion. This was the reason she had pushed so hard. This was why she had put everything on the line, because she knew that by changing the culture at Skylax Air, she wasn't just changing an airline, she was changing lives. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips as she replied, her fingers tapping swiftly on the keyboard. She could have written something generic, but instead, she wrote from the heart. Olivia, thank you for taking the time to send this message. It means more to me than you could know. Skylax is for you, for all of us, and I'm so proud to hear that you feel valued. We're just getting started, but we will continue to build a company where everyone is respected. You belong here, and I'm excited to see how you grow with us. Warm regards, Kimberly Johnson. It was a small gesture, but it felt right. Kimberly knew that her fight wasn't over. There were still challenges to overcome, resistance to face, and more individuals to win over. But the message was clear now. Skylax Air was no longer just an airline. It was a movement. As Kimberly sat back in her chair and gazed out at the sprawling city before her, she felt a sense of quiet satisfaction wash over her. The road ahead would undoubtedly be difficult, but she was no longer fighting alone. The winds of change were blowing strong, and with each passing day, the transformation she had started was becoming undeniable. In the distance, the planes at the airport soared into the sky. Kimberly closed her eyes for a moment, allowing the sound of the engines to fill her mind. She had already risen above the storm, and now she was steering her company into new, uncharted territory where respect, equality, and dignity were the true markers of success. The world was watching, and Kimberly was ready to show them exactly what Skylax Air was made of. Thank you for watching until the very end. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more inspiring stories. Have a wonderful day.